Hi, everyone. Welcome. I'm thrilled and honored to be part of this panel with two other badass ladies who we've asked to join us as we talk about how's remote better. So first, we'll introduce ourselves. We've got a couple interesting questions, and then we'll wrap up. So hi, I'm Lucinda Newcomb. I'm the Chief Product Officer at WW, formerly Weight Watchers. Kim?
Hi, everyone. Kim Waldman, Chief Digital Officer at Athleta.
I'm Aparna Bawa. I'm the Chief Operating Officer at Zoom.
So like I said, we've got quite a panel, so why don't we go ahead and dive in. So first of all, let's think back. I mean, we all know, gosh, has it only been, it's not even been a year. Can you guys believe that? As you think back, wow, what a different environment we are all in versus last January. So let's take a moment and think back how that transition affected all of us. We all had to pivot our businesses, had to pivot for our employees, had to pivot for our customers and members, while also making sure that we were delivering on our promise and delivering for those customers and members. So let's start back. Let's take a moment, go in our time machines to back that day that the music stopped, right? Musical chairs and everybody scrambled. I'll tell you from my perspective, it was a whirlwind. I started at WW on March 9th. So when I tell people I had extreme onboarding for my first week, I'm not kidding. My first 2 days I was in New York and it was, we're having this conversation at the executive level going, I wonder how much this is going to affect us. Fast forward 6 days, 30, 40 plus Zoom meetings with hundreds of people involving thousands of coaches, essentially realizing within 6 days that we were going to have to relaunch all of our in-person studio workshops into virtual workshops. The thousands of Zoom calls we had to schedule for those Zooms, the training of the coaches, the messaging to all of our members. It was absolutely massive undertaking that we did within 6 days. And it was tremendous. And I have to say, watching the way the leadership, watching the way the teams came together to really just everybody just hands down. In the meantime, we all just were starting to work from home all of a sudden and had to shift over from being at home and figure out how Zoom worked. And so, but I think about it, it was such a massive pivotal shift, but it also just created this momentum and this framework for how to face this challenge going forward that I think has been super powerful for all the fact that it was, had some pain along the way. But it was really incredible to see how much we all came together to support it. And I think you guys have similar stories. Kim, you want to talk about how Athleta pivoted?
Yeah, for sure. And I share the same sentiment in it being sort of a whirlwind experience. I also started a new job. I joined Athleta in June. So a little bit sort of into the pandemic and into this remote world. So definitely wasn't the typical onboarding experience you'd expect starting a new job. But, to answer your question, I think around sort of pivots and what I think, made Athleta, successful is it's really about sort of the success being rooted in speed. I think, like you said, right? I think a lot of the trends were really clear in terms of what was happening in that, shift to digital environment, comfort and self-care being more important. Clearly consumers were prioritizing safety and sort of contactless, but what was really differentiating, I think, those who won in those situations was sort of how quickly can you execute against that? How nimble can you be? Can you pivot the organization to sort of get after those opportunities and really sort of have the teams be maniacally focused and singularly focused in getting after it. And so that's really, I think, what we focus on is moving quickly. Now, that's not to say it's sort of easy, right, or a straight line to virtual victory, if you will. But it had a lot of questions and challenges because we're a retail brand and relied heavily on our physical real estate footprint for sales, for customer engagement, for events. And so, we needed to quickly come up with a plan to pivot that and meet the customer where she was. So for us, there were, I think, a clear set of opportunities in that environment to mobilize against. We launched our mask category, which clearly the consumer was asking for and didn't exist before, right? A brand new business. We saw consumers asking us for curbside delivery. So that was another clear opportunity to get after. But I think maybe like even more fundamentally, what we saw was this sort of nugget of insight around the importance of preserving the human connection of a store shopping experience, but like, how do you translate that into a virtual format, right? And I think that was the core challenge that we faced. But from that notion, this idea of virtual styling at Athleta was born. We know that our store associates are really our secret sauce. They've got deep product expertise, but also sort of the personality and the vivaciousness that really brings the brand to life. And so, for us, we said, okay, how do we create a way for our customers to, make appointments with those store associates, to connect with them online via video chat, and in that be able to, share new arrivals, recommend gifts, outfitting, et cetera. And really what we saw is that ability to build that emotional connection actually helped dimensionalize product for a customer that was really used to getting that in the store environment. So, that service has launched. It's actually done really well for us. But I think what's most exciting is that, we have this brand new business model that was sort of born out of the necessity of the early phases of the pandemic. And, I think sort of being early, pivoting, getting after that will keep paying dividends for us in the future.
Great. Abhinav, you want to talk about Zoom?
Sure. Well, we are Zoom, so we're not really surprised, it's not a new thing for us to get on a video conference. But I would say before the pandemic hit in December, we were squarely focused on providing workplace options, allowing our customers and their employees to literally work from anywhere and improve their productivity, efficiency, and if you can improve quality of life, why not? So that was our focus. And, just a metric to give you a sense of scale. In December, our peak, sort of participant rate was about 10 million daily meeting participants. And then the pandemic hit. And I'm going to give you a sense of scale. By April, that same number had grown to about 300 million daily meeting participants in the span of 3 months. There are a couple things that happened with that. First of all, we realized very quickly that the pandemic was changing the way people communicate. And we had this obligation and this privilege to have a solution that really allowed for human connection in a very personal way that nobody else could provide. And that we had an obligation and a privilege to help and be part of that transition. And so a couple things we did, we realized very quickly that there was a huge demand, for example, in the education sector. My kids came home in the first week of March. And of course, for me also, it was a nightmare for our employees also, moving from, an office environment into a work from home environment meant that everybody was at home. We recognized the need to provide some continuity for education. And we started to provide K through 12 services for free across the globe. So for example, by the end of, sort of April, we had about 125,000, schools on our K through 12 free service, spanning about 25 countries. And education, by the way, has been a key business segment for Zoom, albeit we've focused mostly on the university segment. But education is really important. Education happens to be a very important sort of philanthropic sector for our employee base. We have a foundation where we encourage sort of giving both from Zoom and from our employee base. And when we did a grounds up survey of our folks in 2019, it just so happened that education, climate change, and alleviating homelessness were the top 3 initiatives for the company that the company wanted to focus on. So this all made sense. I'm using that as an example to show how, Zoomies were impacted by the pandemic themselves and responded. We had to find a way to respond to needs that our business could uniquely service. And so that's what we did. I would say, if we fast forward about, 10 months or so since last March, and we're here today, the biggest takeaway that we have from our customer base is that the genie is out of the bottle. Remote work is possible. people understand that their employees can be productive no matter where they are with a collaboration suite that Zoom provides. We also know that employers can find talent anywhere. And you're no longer restricted to a geography. You're no longer limited by those shackles. We also know that there's a challenge. How do you go back? People are now thinking about, okay, I know that the genie's out of the bottle. I know I'm going to have some sort of remote experience in my collaboration suite. Is it going to be 100% remote? Maybe not, depending on the type of business. Is it going to be a hybrid workforce? Probably. And what does that mean for my employee base? How do I sort of onboard someone who's completely remote? So you talked about you both started at your companies fully remote. We at Zoom, 40% of our workforce will have, by the end of this year, 40% of our workforce will have joined, never touching a physical Zoom office. We have to take all those people and bring them up to productivity really quickly. And what's most important is they have to feel that culture. The faster they can get ingrained to the culture of the organization, the more productive they will be for that organization. And in a hybrid environment where you have some people in the office, some people outside of the office, what does that mean? And how do you sort of short circuit that onboarding process? That is a challenge that folks are thinking about today. We see that in our customer base. Now, I would say, we have some tricks up our sleeves, obviously, as Zoom to handle all of these challenges, but the conversation about work and about life and how they intersect and whether it's possible to have a very productive life, with your work and your life coinciding in a work from anywhere situation, that the pandemic has proved is possible. I would like to, I know you guys both talked about, your own experiences about onboarding yourselves during a pandemic fully remote. How do you guys think about, your customers of Zoom, both of you? How do you think of this challenge and what have your companies been doing to sort of help that process?
I think this is where the theme that is just so loud and clear across all three of us in our organizations is we went from the urgent replication, the oh crap moment, to the urgent replication, to the reinvention. And it's such a massive pivot and shift. And normally this takes years for companies to do that, to really get toward the reinvention. I think about when mobile first became a thing, and it went from, we started out trying to shove this, this big desktop experience into into an app or into a little teeny phone, and then started to realize, hey, mobile better. Here are the things that you can only do or that you only would do. And now as we've shifted into that reinvention, I think we're thinking about that reinvention both for our members and in fact, how we needed to retrain our coaches and think about our coaches, how so much of a weight loss journey is around the accountability and the support and being seen. How do you do that in a virtual environment? What is the cadence of a virtual workshop? But also, it pushed us to reinvent and launch our program Digital 360, where these coaches really are doing more of this, this one to thousands to be able to see the experience and be inspired and have this aspirational experience, but also still be able to interact. And similarly for our employees, both for our coaches and how we interact with them, but also for our employees, as we think about things like, it started out this moment of, oh no, we have to cancel our offsite. And then you go, oh wait, we can have an offsite. I know it's not offsite, but we still call it that. We can have an offsite every week. And we can keep in touch. We can have these opportunities to bring the entire team together to hear what our priorities are, to have guest speakers, to ruminate, to do breakouts and have brainstorming in such an on-demand, when you want it moment. In the same way that for our members, we're you don't have to now schedule to go to your workshop on Monday at noon when it might be very inconvenient for you. It's always there. It's always available to you. And we have the same opportunity now with our workforce. And it's really shifted things like decision-making, the fact that we can always get the people we need to very quickly onto a Zoom to figure things out and work through them and make a decision much more quickly than when you're oh, so-and-so's off at a conference, right? So having that mechanism, we know where everybody lives. We know how to bring everybody together. And so being able to do it both as for collaboration, for sharing, but having that moment of sensing that the reinvention can happen even in this virtual environment. And to your point, what a benefit of work-life balance that, instead of being like, oh my God, I'm never going to get to the gym tonight, right? It's here, I can just schedule it right in my calendar because I'm not trying to run around. I'm not trying to have to get places physically, is in fact a gift. And we're really looking at that as where do we reinvent and make leverage of that gift?
Yeah, Lucinda, I totally agree. I think a lot of times people kind of go into the virtual work environment thinking about like what they're losing, right? And versus the sort of focus on like what you're gaining and the opportunities that the new medium provides. And, I was one of those people in the beginning, right? Like, starting a new job, right? I was anxious at first. I'm somebody who, as a leader, sort of feeds off of people's energy. I'm a gesticulator, right? I laugh out loud, right? I like dropping by people's desks. And so how do you translate those things into a box was like a question for me. And I think, tough not to be able to meet your team in person. And as leaders, that's a particularly daunting challenge. But I think sort of where you got to is ultimately, where I push myself to get to say, how do you not let sort of these preconceived notions about what the medium is sort of define you as a leader, but say, okay, how do you want to show up as a leader? And then how do you use the toolkit that the new medium actually sort of gives you to communicate that? And so, for me, it's like, okay, where I used to drop by a desk for, a quick joke or an alignment, it's like, okay, Zoom chat, like just get in there, just do it, right? Just leverage it. And points like, it may feel uncomfortable, but, unmute yourself if you want to laugh out loud, right? Like, I think sometimes people forget to do that, but just creating those moments of like, ease, comfort in a virtual environment is absolutely possible. You just have to you have to treat it that way and think about it a little bit differently. The other key point I think that has been important within the Athleta environment, and just something for us, I think, all to keep in mind as we continue through this, is like compassion, right? Like everybody is dealing with different situations at home. Whether, that's like, it's okay to go off camera and accept an Amazon delivery, like that is life. Or for me, right? Like, my husband may be making like the world's loudest espresso in the background, and like that, that just happens, right? And so I think compassion for each other and sort of self-care is a huge part of making this work successfully. And then just the last thing I'd say, within Athleta that we try to do is, apply the same creativity that we're using to provide new services and models to our customers to like how we manage our employees, right? We work in digital, right? And so we're obsessing about sort of the innovation to deliver the brand experience to our consumers. Like, let's not forget to obsess about how we deliver the brand experience to our employees and do that for each other too. And so I think, whether that's, the holiday party on Zoom with the step-by-step mixology with a bartender, whatever it is, I think those moments of ease and letting loose, no matter what the format are just so important. All right, so maybe switching gears a little bit from sort of employees and remote office cultures, I'm interested in hearing a bit more from both of you about sort of what's worked well for your customers and members, and sort of where are you seeing, the puck going in terms of the future. One of the things I alluded to a bit that we're seeing is the consumer increasingly seeking out, deeper connection and meaning. And I think, Aparna, you referenced this too, right? Like, the pandemic has been isolating for a lot of people. And so now more than ever, I think there's this desire for human connection and a deeper sense of belonging. And, where that's really shown up for us is in our Athleta community engagement. Last year, we launched a series of virtual, Zoom-based experiences called Empower Hours, where we had, thousands of our customers gather together to really get into it and have real talk with, inspirational women in the industry, like a Glennon Doyle, for example. And I think that engagement has been a real inspiration point for me, and really pushing us as a company to think, how can we further provide a platform for women to help each other navigate like the increasingly complex, world of modern day womanhood, and what are these new tools going to be able to open up for us to be able to do that? And so that's one example, I think for us, but I'm curious, for your businesses, what are you seeing consumers kind of vote more for? And does any of that, resonate with you? Maybe Aparna, just sort of sharing a little bit about the success Zoom has seen and what the future looks like in terms of inclusive opportunities for your customers.
Absolutely. So our challenge is a little unique in the technology space. As I said, we exited December 2019 thinking we were a business collaboration solution provider. And with the pandemic, what we realized is what we have to offer is required, is needed by so many consumers and prosumers, a small category of consumers that we count as sort of single entrepreneurs or small business owners that are using Zoom to continue their livelihood, to continue the economy. I'm a personal trainer, a dance teacher, a piano teacher, all things that my kids, sort of experience and I experience to provide some continuity. So we've realized that our customer base is varied. And sometimes they can be at odds with each other. What the enterprise wants, more flexibility, is not exactly what the consumer wants. They want simple sort of tell me how to do it quickly, tell me about how to take care of my meeting, etc. So for us, the challenge has been how to handle both of those sets of users with slightly different requirements and still do it really, really well. And I think if I were to think back over the last 10 to 12 months, 2020 has been the year of number one, redoubling our efforts to be open and transparent with our user base and sort of admit when things are going really well, when things were not so great, making changes, taking in a lot of feedback from the outside world. It doesn't matter if you're a single user or if you're a company with 10,000 users. We take your feedback seriously and we focus on our customer experience and our employee experience. Take that feedback, incorporate it really quickly into our processes, and respond. You could respond and say, you know what, I agree with you, I disagree with you, or thank you so much for highlighting that. We have changed our product to allow for X, Y, and Z. It is that iteration and that responsiveness to the customer that I think has helped Zoom get through its own pandemic in 2020, as well as respond to the needs of our customer base. And to be honest, if there's one thing I want to take away from this experience is that it works. To have a singular maniacal focus on your customers, on your employees, and being open and transparent with them really, really works. So that's what I would say would be the biggest learning lesson from this past year. The other thing I would say is that, you as a leader, in order to do that, in order to be open and transparent externally and internally, you have to be yourself. And so I agree with you, Kim. I started off in March, still, I would be mortified if my child walked through my video, and asked me a question or, stuck it. You could see a virtual background, but sometimes what happens is if they get close enough and they stick their hand in, they'll just see the hand.
Right.
It's very jarring. And what I have realized is that I have to get over my own embarrassment and I have to allow for my employee base or the folks that I'm on a meeting with to feel permission to be themselves. And so I don't turn off my video even when I don't have makeup on or when, it's an early morning meeting and somebody has woken me up at 7 a.m. On a weekend. You know what I'm saying? I don't turn off my video. I bring the whole experience. We make a couple jokes in the beginning, and that just sets the tone. It's sort of permission to be yourself, permission to be authentic, and then permission to be your most productive in that setting. One of the biggest learning lessons for me, so between March and June, I don't think I slept. And in fact, I used to joke with our CMO. We would say, okay, you go sleep for a little bit and then I'll take a nap and then, we'll take turns. And what I realized is sharing two things with our employee base has really served to open up. It's been like a catharsis of emotion. Number one, telling people that I take naps. I take the power nap. I will sometimes, if I have a 20-minute interval, I will just hop on over to the couch, which is right there, and just shut my eyes. And I am a different person. I am nicer to the people around me. I'm a better leader. I'm more thoughtful. I come up with better decision-making processes and better decisions as a result if I just take that 20 minutes to take a power nap. And it's okay if it's during the day. The second thing I did, I was not working out. My Athleta wear, which I love Athleta, by the way, thank you very much, Kim, was getting tight. And, you couldn't see it sort of neck up, but I felt it, from here down. And so now what I do is if I have a 20-minute break, I will go run a mile up and down the street right outside of my door. And I will come back sweating and I will say, I just ran. Thank you very much. I'm so sorry. But, I'm here for you. And it's been accepted. And I think what I'm hearing from our employee base is saying those things, being yourself, bringing your authentic experiences as a leader has made other people realize that they can do it too. They're not so scared. And once you take that fear, that embarrassment, that sort of quotient out of the picture, you can get down to work really easily and be your most productive self. Those are the sort of the biggest lessons I've learned, I would say, from the last 12 months.
I love that. The unlock of a power nap cannot be underestimated. So
yes,
I'm with you on that one. Lucinda, I don't know if there's anything, you sort of have learned personally, about what kind of works for you in this environment, or also from your members, right? What have you learned from them? I know one of the biggest transformations WW experienced was the virtual workshop transition. So, how is that going, or what have you learned from that in the future?
Yeah, I'm laughing because the entire time we've been talking about this, my husband's been vacuuming right outside my office door.
Obviously.
So, let's be clear, I don't want to discourage that kind of behavior, but so, it's like, they talk about breaking the third wall in TV. Like, we've all, as authentic selves, broken that wall. Like, you see into our homes, you see what we look like at 7 a.m. as a West Coaster. You see, we all have to now, we talk about bringing our whole selves to work. Well, work came to our whole selves. And, and I think the more we are just so transparent about it, and like things like, hey, I got to go because I've got to get on my Peloton, or you are not going to want to talk to me. Like, these have become such more natural conversations, and, and seeing people's children's run in, and which is adorable. I mean, our CEO, we've had that so many times too with her granddaughter. Like, it's actually, I think it really deepens the relationships in ways that people talk about, like, oh, it's not the same remote, but it's actually deepening a lot of relationships. And we see that in our virtual workshops as well. It's funny because so much of what we hear from our members, what they've always loved about our physical studio workshops, is that, every Monday at noon, it's their same friends, right? And some of them, like, they're friends, they're in this together. It's a very bonding experience. And there was concern about going to a virtual, we still have that. Well, turns out, not only can you still have that with your members from your local meeting, but also we get all these reports of, my mom and I got to do a workshop together. I live in Texas and she lives in Maryland, and like, we got to be on a workshop together, right? As well as we've been able to create more affinity-based workshops, as well as letting people find their ideal coaches. So you're no longer limited to, does the coach down the street actually map to who I am, what I'm on my journey, what motivates me? There's so many different types of members and so many different types of coaches, and now enabling them to find each other and find that deeper connection is just so, so powerful. And, the beauty is we know it's working because we have the data, right? Which, when you think about the in-person, has always been such a challenge on how do you actually capture and gather data and gather true data. And now in this virtual medium, we have that ability to see what's working, see why it's not working, and really collect so much more of those insights, and then be able to rapidly test and learn. And so, thinking about virtual as really that intersection of physical and digital, right? It used to be like just asynchronous digital, just synchronous physical. Really looking at virtual, it's a whole new channel, it's a whole new experience that has the best of some of both of those worlds. And at that intersection can be super magical. So, and like I mentioned earlier, we also enabled us to envision an entirely new experience for a more millennial audience, going after them with our digital 360 experience that was more of this hybrid, and finding that right intersection of virtual and digital that was going to speak to them and speak to the millennial and her busy lifestyle. So, I think it's everything all of you all have said. I completely agree. But you just add in this notion that, in this intersection, you get to bring in and finally get to marry all those things that you always wished you could have whenever you were just focused on one channel or another. So last question, I know as we're coming on to the end of our time together, I think we've all talked about there's some very clear wins, to operating our business and, in a more virtual environment. Like I said, everyone can get on Zoom with a snap of the fingers. That's certainly a bonus. It also, I'll tell you that for me, being on the West Coast and a company whose headquarters is in New York, not having to travel all the time, which I was really expecting to have to do, but also making sure that I'm not the one who's not in the room, right? Let's get the one on Zoom, right? Having that notion that the level playing field is so, so powerful now, as well as, Slack. I mean, I'm in love with Slack. It's like, forget multitasking. It's like multi-dialoguing. It's like, oh my God, I can finally have a mind meld with my team while we're in the middle of this conversation, right? And, with my leaders and, and how do we like shift and change the conversation as it's happening? I think there's so many of these just tangible, tactical things that all of us are finding of why virtual is better. So as we think about, the things we're thankful for and gratitude for virtual better, aside from just thank you, Parna and Zoom, yay, thank goodness you were there for us. Really, really massive thanks, thank goodness you were there. But what are you thankful for in this environment? Any best practices or rituals? I think the power nap is such a great one. But Kim, what do you think of as some of your best practices or rituals?
Yeah, well, first I have to say, to the points of being grateful, since I joined while remote, I am so grateful that Zoom has everybody's name in the bottom left-hand corner of the screen, right? I totally got to skip over the part of a new job where you meet 30 people in one day and sort of leave in like this haze of names. And so that has been much appreciated. But I think maybe broader, I think we've touched on it a bit, but just I think thankful for the perspective change and honestly the chance to reset some thinking, right? It's been a forcing mechanism. It brings a different type of rigor, but also made me realize that, while change may be hard, it's possible, especially sort of if you've got to do it, right? And in some cases may open up brand new opportunities for our business that we hadn't even thought about before. So I think that's a really cool thing to sort of recognize and name through this virtual shift. The other thing I just wanted to riff off of is also sort of the holistic life point. And Aparna, you mentioned sort of the ability to go for a quick, run in the middle of the day. For me, that best practice to just sort of stay active. I think even more than maybe I did during sort of the busy work weeks with commutes. I've been really into Obey Fitness, which is this online platform for on-demand and live fitness classes. It's super high energy. You can do a 20-minute workout. And I got into it one day because I went on their Facebook page and read the comments and interactions from users, all of whom were, working from home, but just having an absolute blast and like bonding with their instructors, and just the effusiveness really sealed the deal for me. And so I signed up. I'm now a diehard fan, and it's been, a highly necessary endorphin generator for me. But I think 2 points. One is like that opportunity to work out every day is something that I wouldn't have had before, and now is a huge part of my life. I love it. But two, sort of that discovery of this like virtual community that sort of blossomed in the midst of virtual, I might not have tapped into before. And so just another, I think, experience that I'm grateful for in this new environment.
Awesome. Aparna, any pro tips on transitioning to this possibly new future hybrid world, virtual plus in real life once we get back to establishing normal?
Yes. Well, I want to answer that question, but I also want to touch on the gratitude piece. What's hit me the most, yes, we are focused on being a business collaboration platform. We offer the ability to work from anywhere. We want to improve, culture, productivity, efficiency, etc. But the stories that have touched my heart the most during this pandemic, there was an article yesterday that our exec team sent around about how a woman in San Francisco was so grateful because her 92-year-old father was able to connect with friends while he's waiting for his vaccine, friends and family, and it's been a lifeline. And the first, I think it's I don't remember the publication, but it's on you can Google it. The other example of that is, my son's tennis coach I would not even have known this. After 10 months of being in the pandemic, she finally said, let's Zoom. And I said, oh, you Zoom? And she said, oh, yeah. She said, my brother is hearing challenged. He's deaf. He lives in a deaf community in Ireland. And Zoom has been amazing. We talk to him all the time. He's able to follow along. She even had some product suggestions for us on how to incorporate the deaf community better. But she said, your solution has been the only vehicle to keep him connected. I was so touched by this that I have to say, I have a lot of gratitude that Zoom is able to provide this service in such a key way. How does it work in sort of being more inclusive? That is the challenge. One anecdote for you guys, our own executive team, we have a CIO who sits in New York, and most of us, not all of us, but most of us sit here in the Bay Area. And so prior to the pandemic, we would have our staff meetings, and we would get Tuesday mornings, we would get in for our staff meetings, and our CIO would join by Zoom. And ever since the pandemic, his biggest point is that, hey, it's democratic now. There are equal sizes of boxes for everyone. And I don't have to feel like I have to jump into a live conversation and somehow interrupt the flow. I'm part of the conversation in a very native way. And I think that is the challenge. That story in and of itself is the challenge for Zoom as we go back into an environment where there's more of a hybrid situation, where there's some people in the office, some people remote. You're bringing them together. You're creating collaboration experiences with all various formats, whether you're on the phone, a cell phone, whether you're dialed in to Zoom on your Zoom client, whether you are in person, et cetera, whether you're sitting in a Zoom room where the camera is focused on you, or a bunch of other people together. What is that environment going to be like? And I would say for us, the reaction is to think about features. For example, we announced this smart screen gallery, which we hope to introduce soon, where you will have an immersive experience with cameras in the room, in a Zoom room, which is a conference room enabled for Zoom, positioned such that even when you're in a conference room with 5 people around the table, each person gets a box, just like the little video box that you see today. For someone who's coming in from the outside, who's zooming in from the outside, they get to see each single person and the reaction they have in the meeting. So it's a much more immersive experience. And in the Zoom room, on the conference room screen, you get to see the same thing with the other person, sort of featured in a box. So I think those kinds of product features, those kinds of sort of immersive elements, those aspects that bring in more people interacting in different ways and try to make it as equal as possible so that all of the contributions can be made. I mean, that will be our focus, going forward for Zoom.
That's fantastic. So I just have to say how much I've absolutely loved this conversation. I think the tips, the insights, the sharing, really, Aparna, Kim, it's just been such a pleasure seeing you both. Thank you so much. And I hope all of you out there have enjoyed and are inspired by our conversation. Thanks. Stay well.
Thank you. Take care.
Thanks.